all of you.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning. So
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning. Good morning. So we've been discussing now for a while the bracha on rice, and we also discussed the bracha on granola. And we had a contradiction in the Gemara as to what is the final bracha, what is the bracha that one recites after eating rice. Now, we have already proven that Rav and Shmuel are wrong. Rav and Shmuel initially did not want to give the bracha of eating rice a mezainis. They said no, only the 5 grains get mezainis. That's Rav and Shmuel said only the 5 grains get mezainis. Rice will not be given that special bracha of mezainis, and we proved Rav and Shmuel wrong because we had a brisa that clearly said that on rice, one would recite a mezainis. And the brisa had read like this. It said, a person who eats rice, he recites it. If he eats a whole kernel rice, you recite Beire Pri Hoadama. But if he grinds it, if he bakes it, and he cooks it, then he would recite a mezainis. So the understanding is that the bracha on rice, the initial bracha on rice, unless you eat it in a non-normal way, but if you eat it the way it's normally eaten, it would be given the bracha of mezainis. And at the end of it, you would recite an al hamichya. The Gemara tried to figure out whose opinion is that. The Gemara said it can't be Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri because he had a very extreme view about rice. He said rice is just like any other grain of wheat and barley. And so we said it can't be him because then you would give it a much more stricter rule. Instead, they said this must be the rabbis. So if it's the rabbis, you see that you recite a mezainis on rice. So what comes out from this brisa is we proved Rav and Shmuel. Then the Gemara later tries to discuss this brisa, and it says that the after bracha is al hamichya on rice. That's what the brisa said. The first beginning bracha was so we proved Rav and Shmuel wrong. And the after bracha, the brisa says, is al hamichya. And the Gemara asks, but we have another brisa that says the after bracha is bari nefashos. So we have a contradiction of what the after bracha on rice is. Now I'm using the word rice. I really should use the word oirez because there's a discussion what oirez really is, and it might not be rice. So I'm going to now switch to using the word oirez. The oirez could be millet or it could be rice. 2 different opinions in the Gemara and the commentaries. So I'm going to use the word oirez, and this way you'll see it's not. You'll be able to understand it whether it's rice or it's millet. So on oirez we have 2 brises. What is the after bracha on oirez? One place it says al hamichya. Another place it says bari nefashos. So the Gemara said, not a problem. There's a machlokes, the rabbis and Rabbi Gamliel. The rabbis argue with Rabbi Gamliel on many things. And even though Rabbi Gamliel was the big nasi, he was the leader, and he came from the channel of he had the legacy of the chief rabbis. Nevertheless, when the other rabbis argued on him, we have to follow the majority. So Rabbi Gamliel had an extreme view, many areas, and one of them was that after eating anything from the 7 species, you have to recite a Birchas Hamazon. Even if you have olives, you have 10 olives or whatever, 20 olives, however many olives you eat and satisfied, you would have to recite a Birchas Hamazon, according to Rabbi Gamliel. You would recite the full grace after meal. And Rabbi Gamliel also held that if you eat a bread made out of rice or millet, the bracha would be al hamichya. Rice bread, well, oirez bread or deichen bread, the bracha would be al hamichya. That was Rabbi Gamliel's. This is Rabbi Gamliel's view, and the rabbis say bari nefashos. So the rabbis seem to say very clearly that there's a bari nefashos bracha, and Rabbi Gamliel seems very clear that you recite the al hamichya. Al hamichya is much longer than bari nefashos. It's like a full paragraph, and bari nefashos is like a sentence. And al hamichya is like a full paragraph blessing. It's a summary of the 3 brachas of the grace after meal. And Rabbi Gamliel says you recite this al hamichya on rice bread, on oirez bread and deichen bread. Now, the Gemara seems to think that's very good. We now figured it out. We have the rabbi's view and we have Rabbi Gamliel's view. And obviously we can follow the rabbis, the majority. But the Gemara is not satisfied. The Gemara says there's a problem. And the problem is that the earlier brisa that said that one recites an al hamichya, and now we found a Rabbi Gamliel that seems to agree with that. It must be his view. His view doesn't fit with that full brisa. Part of that brisa doesn't flow. And so what we want to do is now connect the opinions connect the rabbi with those opinions. And we want to say Rabbi Gamliel, he must be the author of that brisa. We want to connect his name to that brisa. The problem is that brisa has other statements in it that don't fit with Rabbi Gamliel's views. So if that's so, what we're going to need to do is say, doesn't work. We can't explain that view that it's the view of Rabbi Gamliel if some of the statements there don't fit with Rabbi Gamliel. So again, we have a whole statement of a brisa. We have a whole brisa that has a few sentences in it that say different laws. And one of the laws we seem to think fits very good with Rabbi Gamliel. So we want to say he must be the author of that brisa. The Gemara says, how could you do that? Look at the other laws in the brisa. There's another law in the brisa that doesn't fit with Rabbi Gamliel's view. And that's how we ended off yesterday with discussing that. So what was the statement that didn't fit with Rabbi Gamliel's view in that brisa? The statement that it says in the brisa was that if a person ground wheat, made bread out of it, and then cooked the bread, if the bread, after being cooked in water, if it's not intact, the bracha would be boire minem zaynais in the beginning bracha, and the after bracha would be al hamichya. And the Gemara says that cannot be Rabbi Gamliel. That does not fit with him. That's another statement. Again, that's not the statement about the rice part of it. That's a statement about the wheat. And the wheat part of it does not fit with Rabbi Gamliel. This wheat, the wheat law that it says in that brisa, that a person made flour and then he baked it and then he cooked it, that does not fit with Rabbi Gamliel, because that statement says you recite a boire minem zaynais on this bread that's been cooked, and you recite an al hamichya. What do you think Rabbi Gamliel would hold? The Gemara says it can't be Rabbi Gamliel. Why not? What would Rabbi Gamliel hold? So the Gemara says that Rabbi Gamliel holds that even on porridge, you recite Birchas Hamazon. So the Gemara says if on porridge you recite Birchas Hamazon, or if you have dates, you recite Berachos Hamazon. For sure, if you have bread that's been cooked in water, it for sure would be Berachos Hamazon. It's not going to be any worse than porridge. Porridge gets a Berachos Hamazon, according to, in other words, the 3 brachas, the full grace after meal. If porridge gets the full grace after meal, according to Rabbi Gamliel, then for sure the bread that's cooked should also get a Berachos Hamazon. And what's the logic? The logic is that you even made bread out of it. Bread is like considered the most important food that deserves a grace after meal. Bread that's the ultimate. And if you have to recite a grace after meal after eating porridge, for sure you got to recite a grace after meal after eating bread that's been cooked, even if it's not intact, but it's bread, was made into bread. That's it. Berachos Hamazon, the Gemara says. So what does the Gemara conclude? The end of the Gemara concludes that, you know what? We have a contradiction. One place it says after rice, you recite an Al HaMichya. In another place it says you recite a Boirei Nefashos. And the Gemara says it must be that there must have been a mistake and we have to correct it and change it to Boirei Nefashos. Again, that brisa cannot be Rabbi Gamliel, it must be the rabbis. And if that brisa is the rabbis, then we're going to have to switch it to a Boirei Nefashos. It must be Boirei Nefashos. That's the conclusion of the Gemara. And that is how the Gemara finalizes the law of rice, of oires. Yes, Ben.
So you're saying even if it's not from the 5 grains, as long as it's made into bread, you say borei minei mezonot?
According to Rabbi Gamliel,
according
to Rabbi Gamliel, we don't follow him, but according to him, you would recite at least an Al HaMichya afterwards. Now, reciting a Boirei minei mezonot, everyone would agree on, or many opinions would agree that if you have oires, you would recite, and you made bread out of it, you would recite a Boirei minei mezonot. Again, many of these views say, or the majority of these views say that the oires is itself deserves a mezonot bracha. We only had one opinion said it's hamoitzi. That was Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. But all the other views say oires should be Boirei minei mezonot. The question is, what's the after bracha?
Yeah.
What's the after bracha? That's really what they're dealing with. And the after bracha, the understanding is that Rabbi Gamliel would say the after bracha is Al HaMichya, but the other opinions would say the after bracha is Boirei Nefashos. And
so
Rob, go ahead, Ben.
Let me just stop you for 1 second. The Gemara here mentioned this. We brought down the argument of Rabbi Gamliel and the rabbis. And here, the Gemara said that on bread that's made out of rice or oires and doichen, you don't you recite a Boirei Nefashos. So we had a contradiction before. What's the after bracha on oires? And we said one place it says Boirei Nefashos, one place it says Al HaMichya. And now when we bring down the argument of Rabbi Gamliel and the rabbis, it says Boirei Nefashos. So now we're going to correct the earlier brisa that said Al HaMichya and say, no, it can't be. That's Rabbi Gamliel's view. That doesn't fit. The brisa can't be. That brisa is the rabbis, and the Al HaMichya is Rabbi Gamliel's view. That doesn't work. Change it to Boirei Nefashos. Now everything works. So now we have 3 places where it says that the rabbis hold Boirei Nefashos after rice.
After oires.
After oires, excuse me. Yes, after oires. Okay. Yes, David.
Yeah, according to Rabbi Gamliel, it sounds like the things that we normally say Al HaMichya, he says to say grace after meals, and the same thing with the 7 species of fruit. So my question is, it seems like it may be the same thing with wine. So if you're going to say grace after meals after wine, and you're going to say grace after meals on a cup of wine, you would never end. You would drink the wine. You would say grace after meals. You would drink on a cup of wine. You would drink the wine. It would be an ongoing all-day affair of drinking wine and benching.
Now, you came up with this question yourself, or you saw this somewhere?
No, I came up with it myself.
Uh-huh. That's a very nice question. David is asking us, it's actually the bottom Tosfos on the page, but David's asking a very nice question over here, and that is that if a person does the grace after meal with a cup of wine, and Rabbi Gamliel holds that you have to say grace after meal after you drink a cup of wine. So you're going to continuously be reciting the grace after meals and drinking wine and grace after meal. So that could be how the Hasidim started. They followed Rabbi Gamliel and they just started drinking wine for bringing, benching, drinking wine. They never ended. But the thing is
maybe that's why they invented vodka, so they didn't have to do that.
Right. So the bottom Tosfos, it's a very interesting Tosfos, because the reason I say it's interesting is because you have such a question. You have to, in order to ask such a question, that's why I asked you where you got it from. There's a lot of views. There's so many different scenarios that knock off that question. For example, number one, not everyone holds that you need to recite the grace after meal on wine. Number two, not everyone holds you recite the grace that you recite. Even it could be that you don't recite grace after meal on wine. It could be only a zimun requires a cup of wine and not the grace after meal. So if it's only the zimun that requires it, so then you don't always have a zimun. But even if you do have a zimun, then you could knock off that question by saying that not everyone necessarily drinks wine from the zimun and would require a second zimun with a cup of wine. In other words, there's numerous views that knock off. It's based on a lot of, you have to base it on, according to this view, it could be a question. But even according to that view, it's only a question if you follow that view. Even that view, it's only a question. You have to, like, the amount of opinions in order to ask the question deserves a lot, like a whole scholarly discussion in order to ask the question. You have to come up with all the specific views that aren't the assumed opinion. So, but maybe we'll go through the Tosfos now that you mentioned it. Well, Ben, what is your? What would you like to
wanted to say, I thought if you'd say once the bracha, you don't repeat it again on the second glass of wine or third glass of wine.
No, that's the first bracha. But if you said an end bracha, then you would have to start all over again.
So after the end bracha, you say again?
For example, I'll give you an example. The custom is that when you have a minyan at a meal, right, you recite a zimun with a cup of wine. You use a cup of wine when you bench, like at a Sheva Brochos, you'll see it often. A lot of at a bris, they use a cup of wine to bench, to say the grace after meal. Even though they drank wine during the meal and they said a bracha on the wine, now they bench. And now the person who leads the benching, what does he do? He drinks the cup of wine afterwards, and he needs to recite a new bracha on the wine, even though he's still there, and he recited a bracha on wine earlier in the meal. But now he benched, and he's going to be drinking another cup of wine right after the benching.
Why does he drink another cup of wine? After benching, the meal is done.
Is over. Done. Because the way it works is, I'm sure you've seen it, the person puts his hand up and he holds the cup of wine and he says the benching over the wine, and that wine becomes a mitzvah, a blessing, a koshel bracha. And at the end of the benching, he concludes and he says, Baruch Adonai Asher Elokeinu melech haolam b'rit pri hagafen, and he drinks. And then some of the people who want a segula, they say, oh, let me take a little, and they get blessed. Everyone wants, and it's considered a very important thing. People should drink from the cup of wine.
I saw it once and I didn't understand it. So
that's the tradition. Now, some people, and what David is telling us is some people do that even if they have a group of three, zimun of three. If you have three people saying grace after meal together, some people will do a cup of wine on that. Now, David took a different opinion, and that is even if you're sitting alone in benching, and this is not a common view, but there is such a thought that maybe you would recite grace after meal. You would recite your own grace after meal on a cup of wine.
I see.
Now, and then he asked the question, then according to Rabbi Gamliel, then you'd have to say grace after meal again, and you'd be stuck again. But see, the logic behind that is that means that you're saying the grace after meal, the cup of wine is for the grace after meal, not for the zimun. Most people think, and there is sources that it's for the zimun, not for the.
So the glass of wine will be considered a meal, and you say again, and after blessing.
If you, according to Rabbi Gamliel, yeah, and then you say an after blessing. Now, what do? We say an al hamichya bracha. It's called al hagefen, bal pri hagefen. That we say that after the wine. So you drink the cup of wine, and then you recite an al hagefen, bal pri hagefen after the cup of wine.
So you are done then.
What? So we're done. We're done, unless you want more. Unless you want to hold a cup and say the al hagefen, val pri hagefen, val tnumas hasada, and then but yeah, there's no such thing. There's no such source. So Tosfos asked this question that David is asking, and at the bottom Tosfos he says, Rabbi Gamliel gave to Rabbi Akiva to say the grace after meal. Now, what was the logic behind this? So you have to also know, see, what we're seeing are some real fanatic views here. We saw Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri holds that on rice, you could even fulfill the mitzvah of matzah. You would transgress the prohibition of chametz on rice. You recite a grace after meal on rice. Rice is a regular grain. That's a very extreme view, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Now we also saw Rabbi Gamliel has some extreme views. He holds that all the 7 species, you recite grace after meal. This is also very extreme. We're not familiar with that. Reciting on a cup of wine, if you drank a cup of wine, you would have to recite the entire grace after meal. This is Rabbi Gamliel's view, very extreme. Or if you had, as I said, 20 grapes or whatever, or olives or pomegranate, if you satisfied yourself on it, you would recite grace after meal. And now there's another view, Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is also an extremist. He has a view that anything you eat, even broccoli, if you eat and become satisfied on broccoli, you would have to recite grace after meal. That is Rabbi Akiva's individual view. The rabbis don't agree with him. So Rabbi Gamliel, he served everyone dates, and he tells Rabbi Akiva, go do the grace after meal for everyone. Have everyone else in mind. In the olden days, they used to have everyone else in mind when they would say the grace after meal. And one person would say it and everyone else would say amen. That is the preferable way that it was done. Nowadays, we don't have as much concentration, so everyone says it themselves, even if you do a zimun, which means you join together with everyone and you say a few sentences in the beginning that encourage everyone that we're all going to say the grace and let's praise the name of God. That's called a zimun. When you have more than 3 men, especially when you have 10, you even use God's name and you say Nevarech Elokeinu. Let's bless God, She'achalnu mishalei, that we ate. We say God's name and that we ate in His presence from His. And so this is the zimun is a special addition to the benching. Now, the zimun, the way it was done, was one person said it and had everyone else in mind, and they would say amen. So Rabbi Gamliel wanted Rabbi Akiva to say the grace after meal for everyone, and they could all say amen, and he would lead the benching. Why did he want Rabbi Akiva? Because Rabbi Akiva, even though he doesn't agree with Rabbi Gamliel that on the 7 species you recite the grace after meal, but he goes even further. He says on any food, even vegetables or fruits or anything, you recite grace after meal if you're satisfied. So Rabbi Gamliel thought Rabbi Akiva is the perfect candidate. Look, let's have it out now. We're gonna recite the grace after meal on the dates, and you'll have everyone in mind. They'll say amen, and we'll sort of we'll fulfill the obligation. So Rabbi Akiva didn't listen to him. He jumped ahead and he said an alamichya blessing. He didn't do the grace after meal. He said the alamichya. Why did he do the al ha'etz blessing? Why didn't he do the grace after meal? So the simple reason is because he maybe didn't eat enough to be satisfied. And so therefore, he didn't say the grace after meal. So Rabbi Gamliel assumed he was satisfied, but he didn't eat enough to satisfy his hunger. And therefore, you don't recite the grace after meal, even in Rabbi Akiva, who has an extreme view, but he did not recite the grace after meal. That's one. Another way of looking at it is he knew that the halacha does not follow him. He had his view, but he knew the other rabbis didn't agree with him. And therefore, he decided to do or he felt it's appropriate, or at least in their presence, for sure, in their presence, he felt it's appropriate to do the al hagef. So that was why so this is why Rabbi Gamliel gave it to Rabbi Akiva to say the grace. Again, everyone remember the story here? The story was they didn't have a full meal. All they had were dates. Rabbi Gamliel served everyone dates. This was a meal of dates. And Rabbi Gamliel asked Rabbi Akiva to say the grace after meal. And Rabbi Akiva...
It was a test.
Almost like a test. Well, anyway, Rabbi Akiva jumped ahead and said the al hamichya bracha. He didn't say the grace after meal, as Rabbi Gamliel sort of expected. And Rabbi Gamliel screamed at him afterwards and said, "Why are you mixing into this argument between me and the rabbis? You should have listened. You should have done the grace after meal." Now Tosfos says that there is a concept that's known that you don't do the zimun on fruits, ein mezamnin al hapiros, and Tosfos assumes that would apply, that you only do zimun. So again, the Tosfos is having an assumption, and he's going to change it right afterwards in his answer. But in his assumption, he says that why did Rabbi Gamliel want Rabbi Akiva to say grace after meal on dates with a zimun, with a communal format, which means that that you have everyone else in mind. That communal format called zimun, that does not apply to anything but bread, at least in Tosfos' assumption. Only bread gets a zimun. Even Rabbi Gamliel, who says grace after meal on things that aren't bread, but in Tosfos' assumption, zimun, the communal benching is only on bread.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes,
if I may. So there's these 3 different choices, so to speak, in saying a blessing after meal, right? There's the Birkat Hamazon, there's the Al Hamichya, and there's the Borei Nefoshos. So what I would like to understand is, and different rabbis have different opinions about what you say and different things. What's the underlying reasoning that they are using for making a decision to choose one after bracha over another one? They're not just somebody said earlier, or I referred to somebody else who said earlier, but whoever the earlier is, what's the underlying rationale behind this is the reason and this is the bracha you should say, what I think, versus this is the reason for this other bracha? Right.
So we've discussed it over the last few days. I don't know if you caught up on the YouTubes, but we have the YouTube channel. So we've gone through these ideas and thrown a few thoughts together. But that is sort of what we're doing. This is it's called a work in progress. We're trying to see the different views. And I must tell you that we still have a few more pages to this chapter, which really is the source of numerous pages in the Shulchan Aruch. So we are learning the origin of the laws in the Shulchan Aruch here. And we're figuring out these different views. See, today you just learned a new opinion of Rabbi Akiva, and he and in this Tosfos itself that we're discussing Rabbi Gamliel's view, we're going to find something new as well, that he's going to add a whole new dimension. So we're learning different things about the different rabbis and these different blessings, and that's part of studying Gemara, is you sort of have to see the different avenues and different way things express themselves to be able to say, now we figured it out. This is this rabbi's view. That's that rabbi's view. But in the initial stage, you can throw ideas together and say, it seems this, it seems that. But until we get all of his views and then put them together, and then we can really at least try to have a better picture. So that's part of studying Talmud. We're gathering the information first.
Well, I see that, and I see that, Rabbi Akiva has this opinion, and Rabbi Gamliel has this other opinion, and Yochanan ben Nuri has another opinion, and I guess I'm seeing that their opinion, but I'm not really understanding the underlying reasoning that they are using to get
you can't figure any. You can't like come up with any thoughts on it. Like, why would rice be a grain? Could you come up with any thoughts on that?
Why would rice be a grain?
Yeah,
rice is a grain. What do you mean?
Okay, so then you understand Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Okay,
But
now let's look at the other one, Rabbi Gamliel.
But there's a distinction. There's a distinction between the wheat grain and the rice grain.
Oh, really?
We
So
have.
you understand the rabbis now. Now you understand the rabbis. Okay.
Rebbe, let me ask it this way: do we start from a minimum bracha and work our way up, or we work from a maximum bracha and work our way down, or neither one? Meaning, do we start with eat anything, eat bar nefashos, but if you eat a grain, you should do me'an shalosh, unless you're sitting down to have a meal and everything, and then you do all three brachas? Or does it work the other way? Typically, if you eat, you should be doing three brachas. But if you only eat this, you only need to do this. And if you only do this, you need to only do that.
So it seems that the beginning brachas work that you start off with a specific bracha of how it's created, and afterwards sometimes it changes. It either goes down or goes up. And the after bracha, it seems like it's individualized. This gets this, that gets that, and the third thing gets a third thing. So it's sort of neither. But anyway, we'll see how it develops. So in any event, so we have in this Tosfos over here. The problem is my time is already up. Do we have another few minutes? Is there anyone in a major rush? You have another 5 minutes, 3 minutes? Okay. So let's continue. So Tosfos over here mentions that the initial thought of Tosfos was that you don't do zimun only on bread. And Tosfos is surprised. Why is Rabbi Gamliel thinking that Rabbi Akiva will do the grace after meal, which that is not surprising, the grace after meal, but with a zimun. In other words, and have everyone else in mind. That's the way he understands. That's the way Tosfos is learning the Gemara, that Rabbi Gamliel wants Rabbi Akiva to sort of have everyone in mind and do a zimun, a communal blessing. And you only do that on bread, he thinks initially. And then he answers, no, that really anything that you recite the three blessings for, that would deserve a zimun. You could do a zimun on it as long as you're reciting grace after meal. So again, grace after, the zimun is not based on bread in his answer. Zimun is based on reciting the full grace after meal. And now, what happened with Rabbi Akiva? Did Rabbi Akiva have everyone in mind when he said the al ha eitz val pri ha eitz, or did he just recite it to himself? Because according to halacha, the grace after meal, that's a bracha. It's better to have everyone else in mind initially. Nowadays we don't do that, but that was the initial thing. But the other food items you didn't have everyone else in mind. So did Rabbi Akiva, who did not do the grace after meal, he did the al ha'etz val priya eitz, he did the summarized version. Did he have everyone else in mind? Better not to. So Taisus says when Rabbi Akiva did it, he just did it to himself. He didn't have in mind everyone else. Everyone else made their own blessings, because really you're not supposed to have others in mind. Preferably for the alamichya and the Bari Nefesh, it's better for each person to recite their own bracha. Now Taisus then asks if Rabbi Gamliel holds you do all three brachas. So and he also holds you do a zimun when you drink wine. So now comes David's question. Rabbi Gamliel holds you do the grace after meal even after you do grace after meal even after wine. And based on the newest understanding of Taisvis, that a zimun is done even if a zimun is done as long as you do grace after meal, you do zimun. It's not based on bread, it's based on doing a grace after meal. So if you do a zimun based on grace after meal, and Rabbi Gamliel holds you do grace after meal after wine, so then after you have a meal or after you drink wine, you would end up doing a zimun. And if you do the zimun, he says, and you use a cup, if you hold that you use a cup, so then you'll continuously be stuck with this problem. Why are you going to be stuck with this problem? Because if you use a cup and you're doing a zimun with three people, and it's encouraged that everyone should drink from the wine, so then you're going to need to do another zimun right afterwards. So it's a little different than David took it a little step further, that he wants to do a grace after meal with a cup, even without a group. Taisvis is talking really about if you have a group of three, and you have this group, or if you have a group of 10, either way, you're doing a cup of wine, and then you're going to have, everyone's going to drink from it. So now you're going to need to do another zimun, another grace after meal. You got to drink you're going to drink another cup of wine. So now you're going to have to say grace after meal again, and everyone else drank with you. So they're also going to be part of your zimun. And so you're going to end up using another cup, and this will go on forever. So Taisus answers that you don't necessarily, not everyone is going to drink from the cup of wine. Not necessarily will everyone drink from it. And if they don't, then you're not going to have a zimun anymore, and therefore you're not going to be doing a cup of wine, even though you will say grace after meal, but they didn't. Now, the Taisus then asks, the person who drank from it, he would have to recite another. The person who does the grace after meal, he's going to be drinking a cup of wine, and he drank a cup of wine. Now he has to do another grace after meal, and then there won't be an end to it. And this sounds like maybe David's logic. Why, in other words, he's going to use another cup. He's going to use another cup, I guess, for the final one. And he says it's not a problem because if you don't drink the full amount, a full like revius, so you can get out of the problem. In other words, he'll have to not drink the full cup. If he doesn't drink the full cup, he drinks only mole lugmav, which means a cheekful. He fulfills his obligation on the cup of wine, and he ends up reciting an al hagefen bracha on the wine, even though it's Rabbi Gamliel who holds you're supposed to recite grace after meal after the 7 species. But if you don't drink the full amount of a revius, you then have a al hagefen bracha. And this is something new. In other words, that even Rabbi Gamliel, who says on all 7 species you say the grace after meal, there is room for an al hamichya bracha, an al hagefen bracha. In other words, don't think that Rabbi Gamliel doesn't believe in the al hamichya bracha. He does. There is such a bracha according to him. It's rare to say it. When do you say it? And Taisus ends off. Does Rabbi Gamliel not believe in a al hamichya bracha? Of course he does. Now, al-hamichya itself, we don't have a problem. Rabbi Gamliel has. When does Rabbi Gamliel say you do al-hamichya? If you eat rice bread. Rabbi Gamliel said you do al-hamichya. Remember that? So we know Rabbi Gamliel holds al-hamichya, but we don't know how if he holds of al-hagefen. Does he ever say an al-hagefen bracha? And here we have that you say an al-hagefen bracha when you will say an al-hagefen bracha in a scenario where you drink less than the revius, but you drink more than malei lugmav. That would be the example of, according to Rabbi Gamliel, when you would have the al-hagefen bracha. Malei lugmav means a cheekful. So that's the conclusion of Tosfos, and it basically comes out with some new laws regarding Zimun. Zimun is really connected to the next chapter, so we're not really getting too much into the Zimun communal blessing, but we're just touching upon it here. And the idea of the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel, again, this is not the view that we follow, but it is interesting to see how his view would work according to him and how he holds about the other blessings. So there is room for the other blessings, but that's not the norm. The norm is, you say, the grace after meal. Yes, Ezra.
Well, I thought the reason why Rabban Gamliel asked Rabbi Akiva to do it was because, as you said, Rabbi Akiva says that if you eat enough of something, then you should make a birkat, Hamazon, okay? Yeah. And so therefore, he felt that he was of like mind as Rabban Gamliel. But as it turned out, Rabbi Akiva responded to him. He says, Yachid ve'Rabim kerabim. And so even Rabbi Akiva is basically saying my idea it really doesn't hold even in this case. And that's the reason why I did it the way I did it. So that's probably the reason why the discussion was between Rabban Gamliel at the end. Why didn't you do it this way? And that's his response, because he subordinated his own point of view when he did it that way, because of the fact that when you one versus many, we go according to the many. And that's the way I understood it.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely one of the explanations that it's knows he was giving in to the main view. There is another view that he according to him, it wouldn't have been a grace after meal because he did not eat enough to satisfy himself. That's another way of understanding it, an alternative option. You don't like that alternative option?
No, because you're adding something that is not there. I mean, the assumption was, he gave them, brought out the dates, and everybody is eating dates. So, you may, Rabbi Akiva may have eaten enough dates that he felt that he could do a regular Birkat Hamazon if he was by himself. But the fact of the matter was he wasn't. He was amongst others. So therefore, he has to go according to the Rabbi.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so as you're saying, it fits more with the wording. And I mean, why didn't he explain his own excuse, his own reason? You're saying he should have explained his own situation also.
I think he
instead
did.
Of just
no,
right.
I think
According to you, he
because
did.
When he said
according to me, I understand. According to the way you're explaining it, he sort of explains his view as well. According to the other way, he's not really talking about his own view. He's just talking about Rabbi Gamliel versus the rabbis. Okay, that's a interesting point. Good point. Okay, everyone. Well, I want to wish you a very good Shabbos. Sorry for taking up so much of your precious time. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you, Rebbe.
Right. Correct.
Thank you, everyone. Shabbat shalom. Bye-bye.